In 2012, Ivy Callahan vanished into the Colorado wilderness, her last words captured on a grainy camcorder. "If anything happens, I chose this." 7 years later, a blood-soaked sleeping bag surfaces in a remote lake, clutching a note that whispers of betrayal. "He promised not to follow me." What secrets did the forest keep, and who ensured Ivy's scream stayed silent? The sun filtered through the canopy in golden ribbons, falling gently over the woman who stood at the edge of the Pine Ridge trailhead. Ivy Callahan, 28, flipped her hood over her long chestnut hair and adjusted the heavy backpack against her spine. Her hands, pale and scarred from years of outdoor work, held tight to a small, outdated camcorder. "Okay," she said softly, the lens catching a nervous smile. "Solo trip, day 1. Let's see if we find what I'm looking for out here." She laughed faintly, but there was something hollow beneath it. The camera swayed as she turned to show the towering trees behind her, the sky pale and endless above. Then, just before the footage cut to black, her eyes returned to the lens. Her smile faltered. "If anything happens. I was here. I chose this." A week later, a local ranger, Russ Mandel, was the first to report something strange. A silver Toyota Corolla had been parked near the trailhead for days, untouched. No footprints around it. No movement. Just silence. "Could be a thru-hiker," the ranger had said into the radio. "But I'm getting a bad feeling about this." Inside the car was a wrinkled Colorado Trail map marked in red pen, a camping permit signed Ivy Callahan, and an old granola bar wrapper on the passenger seat. Her backpack wasn't in the car. Neither was her phone. The keys were still in the ignition. The first search began that afternoon. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers. But no one found Ivy, no campsite. No footprints beyond a mile from the trailhead. She had vanished into the woods like smoke. 2 weeks later, the official search was called off. Detective Arlo Mendez, then in his mid-40s, had reviewed the case personally. She was smart, he had said. Experienced hiker. No indication of suicide. No note. No struggle. Just gone. Rumors ran wild. Some said bears. Others swore she faked her death and disappeared on purpose. One local woman claimed she saw a shadowy figure walking the trails barefoot the night Ivy vanished. But without a body, without blood, and with no digital trail left behind, the case went cold. In her small Denver apartment, Ivy's bedroom remained untouched. Her parents refused to pack her things. Her mother, Denise, would sit for hours with Ivy's college sweatshirt clutched in her arms, replaying that last voicemail again and again. "Hey, Mom, I'm just calling before I go out of signal. I'll check in when I get back. Don't worry, I need this. I love you." That was the last time anyone heard her voice. The camcorder, mailed back months later by park staff, had been overlooked. It had fallen into a crevice under a log, only to be found by a group of Boy Scouts. The footage was short, just over 30 seconds, but it haunted the lead ranger who watched it. She didn't look scared, he told the press, but she looked resigned. Despite the clip being passed to police, nothing substantial came from it. The case file ballooned with false leads and dead ends. By the end of 2013, Ivy Callahan's name had faded from headlines. In online forums, she became another cautionary tale, a reminder of the risks women face hiking alone. Strangers posted her photo, wide-eyed and smiling with a mountain backdrop, under titles like "America's Vanished" and "Mystery of the Pines." But for those who knew her really knew her, the silence was unbearable. Delilah Keene, Ivy's childhood friend, gave one tearful interview that winter. She was going through something, Delilah said, brushing tears from her cheeks. She wouldn't say what, but she was hurting. She said the trail helped her quiet the noise. When asked if Ivy was running from something, Delilah had looked away. I think she was trying to run toward something. Maybe peace. Maybe the truth. I don't know. Back in the woods, the seasons rolled on. Snow blanketed the high trails. Spring melt swelled the creeks. And still, no sign of Ivy. The trailhead where her car was found grew quiet again. Hikers passed through without knowing a woman had once disappeared from that very path. Only a single wooden sign stood nearby, weather-worn and cracked. Respect the wild. It remembers everything. And in the darkness of the pines, beneath layers of moss and rot, something did remember. 7 years would pass before the forest spoke again. On an early autumn morning in 2019, as fog curled across Shadow Lake, a fisherman named Walter Briggs cast his line. He was alone, his usual Saturday ritual, quiet and uneventful. Until the line snagged. When he pulled, it didn't move like a rock or log. It resisted, heavy, soggy. God, he muttered, standing up in the tiny boat. He leaned over and hooked the edge of it, a bundle of dark, tangled fabric. At first he thought it was a tent. Then he saw the faded patch sewn into the corner. Osprey Sleeping Systems, Model 2012, and there, embedded in the inner lining, were long dark stains that refused to wash away with the water. His hands shook. Inside a torn corner pocket, he found something else, a scrap of weathered paper, protected in a cracked Ziploc bag. On it, barely legible, "He promised not to follow me." I should have known better. The story forgotten, buried, nearly erased was about to begin again, and this time it wouldn't be so easy to look away. The sky above Shadow Lake was the color of dull metal, churning with morning mist. Walter Briggs, a wiry man in his 60s, stood motionless at the edge of his aluminum boat. He stared down at the sodden sleeping bag sprawled in the bottom, its edges tangled with reeds and algae, its interior dark with age and something else. Blood. He didn't speak for nearly 10 minutes. Then, with trembling fingers, he unzipped the pocket. Inside, a mold-eaten Ziploc bag. A page, half destroyed but barely readable. "He promised not to follow me. I should have known better." Walter dropped his fishing rod and grabbed his radio. "Ranger station, this is Briggs. You need to send someone. Now." Within 2 hours, yellow tape had cordoned off the lake's northern edge. A crime scene team arrived in full gear. The bag and its contents were cataloged, dried, photographed. The bloodied patches were carefully cut for lab analysis. Sheriff Lydia Beckett stood beside the forensic van, her face taut with concentration. She was in her 40s, new to the county, but she'd heard whispers of the Ivy Callahan case. A woman who disappeared without a trace. She held the bag journal fragment in her gloved hand, reading it again. "That name, that feeling. I want eyes on the 2012 file." "All of it," she told her deputy. He hesitated. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Beckett nodded. "Call Mendez." 3 hours later, Arlo Mendez sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone. He hadn't heard that name in years. Ivy Callahan. He thought he'd made peace with her vanishing, buried it with the rest of the ghosts. But the moment Sheriff Beckett's voice said Shadow Lake and sleeping bag in the same sentence, it all came flooding back. He ran a hand through his graying hair, eyes drifting to the worn leather notebook on his dresser. His Ivy file. She'd never really left him. Arlo pulled on his coat and walked out the door, past the porch wind chimes Ivy's mother had once given him. They hadn't rung in years. Back at the station, Beckett laid out the evidence. The sleeping bag was traced to an Osprey 2012 model. Ivy's parents confirmed she'd owned one, bought it herself the week before she left. The journal scrap was harder to trace. Water damage made it almost illegible. But Arlo knew the handwriting. He didn't need to compare it to Ivy's old letters. "That's hers," he said quietly. Beckett watched him. "You sure?" He nodded. "I'd bet my soul on it." Arlo leaned over the evidence table. "She was headed toward Pine Ridge," he said, tapping the topographic map. "But this lake? It's almost 40 miles off route." "Could she have gotten lost?" Beckett asked. He shook his head. "She was too experienced. That detour would have taken days. She didn't have the supplies." Beckett flipped through Ivy's original missing persons report. No signs of struggle. No campsite. No dropped gear. "No body," Arlo added, "and no blood, until now." The room went still. Then he said, "This changes everything." Later that evening, Arlo sat alone in the station's archives, pulling boxes he hadn't touched in years. Ivy's case had been thick with theory and thin on fact. He flipped through each page: her background, her email records, the camcorder footage. He paused on a photo taken from the last known sighting. Ivy at a gas station near the trailhead. She looked tired. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Solo trip," she'd told the cashier. "Just me in the mountains." But what if it hadn't stayed that way? Arlo's mind wandered to a man he'd once questioned, Zane Talcott, Ivy's ex-boyfriend. Fit, charismatic, unsettling. He had claimed no contact for months before Ivy disappeared. But there were cracks in that alibi Arlo had never fully closed. There were others, too. An older wilderness guide named Reed Hollis. A friend who'd stopped returning Ivy's calls. A voicemail Ivy never got to send. Every cold case had roots, and now they were shifting. The next morning, Beckett met Arlo at the forensics lab. A young analyst named Maeve Ortega greeted them with a report in hand. She'd been fast-tracked from Denver, known for reconstructing degraded materials and partial DNA profiles. She pointed to a magnified image of the bloodstain. "We ran 2 rounds of testing. It's female and a mitochondrial match to Denise Callahan, Ivy's mother. That's her blood in the bag." Beckett's jaw clenched. "Then this just went from cold case to homicide." Arlo stared at the image. 7 years, he whispered. "And her blood's just been sitting in that water, waiting." Outside the lab, the autumn air bit through Arlo's coat. He lit a cigarette, a habit he thought he'd broken, and looked out over the hills. She trusted the wrong person. He said to no one. She knew someone was following her. Beckett joined him quietly. "You think that note was a warning?" "I think it was the beginning of a confession," Arlo replied. "And whoever followed her might still be out there." The lake had waited 7 years to speak. Now it was their turn to listen. The words on the page weren't just letters. They were Ivy. "He promised not to follow me. I should have known better." The ink had bled and blurred, but the sentence remained intact, almost as if it had clung to the fibers with sheer will. Arlo Mendez ran his gloved fingers lightly over the Ziploc bag containing the page. He didn't need a transcript. He'd read it a dozen times already, and each reading carved deeper into his chest. The woman behind those words wasn't careless or paranoid. She had been afraid. Maeve Ortega sat alone in the forensic lab late that night under the cool, humming light of the microscope. The tiny stain she'd swabbed from the corner of the sleeping bag had yielded 2 things: a positive identification of Ivy Callahan's blood and something else, a second DNA profile. It was male. Not enough for identification, not yet, but enough to prove Ivy wasn't alone. She leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. Ivy's face from that grainy gas station footage flashed in her mind, her eyes cautious but determined. This wasn't just a missing person anymore. This was a crime scene preserved in silence for 7 years. Maeve typed a note into the case file. Secondary DNA isolated. Testing underway. Sample age consistent with 2012. She paused before closing the report, then added one more line. Ivy was never truly alone. That night, Arlo couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, flipping through Ivy's old photos. In one, she stood barefoot on a boulder, arms raised in triumph, wind whipping through her hair. In another, she was half smiling with her hiking pack half zipped, a smear of dirt on her cheek. He remembered when she first walked into the station in spring 2011. "I'm planning a solo trail series," she had said. "I just want someone to know my route." Even then, Arlo had sensed something sadness beneath the confidence, like she was trying to outrun something invisible. Over time, she'd come back, for permits, for weather maps, and sometimes just to talk. About growing up in Denver, about her father leaving, about finding pieces of herself in the silence of the woods. And then, she was gone. Now, piece by piece, she was resurfacing. Maeve called the next morning. "There's something you need to see." She pushed a thumb drive across the desk. "It's restored camcorder footage. We ran new software to recover skipped frames. It's glitchy, but there's something new." Arlo inserted the drive and leaned in. Ivy's face appeared on screen. The same clip from the trailhead, but now, it didn't end where he remembered. After she turned the camera to face the trees, the screen went dark for 2 seconds, then flickered back on. She was whispering, "I'm not crazy. I know what I saw." The camera jostled violently. A sudden motion in the trees behind her, then static. It froze on a single frame, a blur of fabric in the distance. Possibly red. Then the screen cut. Arlo leaned back slowly. "Jesus," Maeve frowned. She was scared. "More than scared," he replied. She was being followed. They brought the video to Beckett later that afternoon. She watched in silence, arms crossed tightly. When the screen went black, she said, "We need to reopen interviews. Everyone Ivy knew, start with the inner circle." "I'll handle Zane," Arlo said flatly. Beckett raised an eyebrow. "The ex-boyfriend?" "Yeah," he said. "And this time, I won't be so polite." Meanwhile, Maeve returned to the lab. The DNA profile continued uploading through Coda Snow. Match yet. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Ivy had left more behind. She opened the evidence folder again. Inside was a single surviving Polaroid found among Ivy's things in 2012. Ivy standing next to an older man, both smiling in front of a trail marker. No name had been attached. She scanned the image, enlarging the man's face. He looked weathered. Beard, sun-damaged skin, eyes too tired to match his grin. Maeve zoomed in on the corner of his shirt. Reads outdoor supply. She froze. It was a small wilderness store near the base of the trail. Ivy had bought gear there. Maybe more. Maeve quickly typed an email to Beckett and Arlo. Subject: possible. Witness Reed Hollis. Attached was the photo. This man may have been the last person to see her alive. She wrote. That evening, Arlo returned to the lake. Shadow Lake was different in the dusk, still and mournful. A breeze stirred the cattails. Water lapped softly at the edges of the dock where Walter Briggs had stood. Arlo knelt and looked into the water. Why here? He whispered. Why dump her sleeping bag in a lake so far from her route? Why leave behind a bloody trace? It felt like a message. He sat there for a long time, watching the water shimmer beneath the dying light. Somewhere beneath that surface truth had waited patiently. And it had just begun to rise. The cafe hadn't changed. Same cracked leather booths, same clattering dishes behind the counter. But Zane Talcott looked different. He leaned back in his seat, arms folded, wearing a windbreaker and mirrored sunglasses. His beard was trimmed to stubble, and his blonde hair had started to gray at the temples. A local legend in the outdoor community still. Working at the climbing gym, still teaching tourists to scale rock faces like gods. But Arlo Mendez knew better. He remembered the way. Zane sat during the first interview in 2012, arms clenched, jaw set, voice calm but too smooth. The kind of calm that tries too hard not to crack. Now, Zane smiled when he saw Arlo approach. "Didn't think I'd see you again, Detective." "Retired," Arlo replied, sitting down across from him. "But sometimes ghosts don't care." "About that." Zane's smile faded. "You heard about the discovery," Arlo began. Zane nodded. "Sleeping bag in a lake, yeah. Wild stuff. Belongs to Ivy." "I figured," he said, too quickly. Arlo tilted his head. "You two were still talking before she disappeared, weren't you?" Zane scoffed. "No, we broke up that spring. March, I think. It ended messy. She wanted space. Said she needed to get away from everything." "Everything like what?" "Life, people, me, probably." "You fought a lot." Zane shrugged. "We were passionate. Things got intense sometimes." "That's not a crime." "No," Arlo said, "but stalking is." Zane's posture stiffened. "I never followed her." Arlo let the silence hang. Then he slid a printed still across the table. Paulo let the silence hang. Then he slid a printed still across the table. Across the table. A printed silence hang. Grainy frame from Ivy's recovered camcorder footage. The blurred red shape in the distance. "Recognize that jacket?" Zane stared at it. Something flickered in his eyes, then vanished. "Could be anything. A hunter, a lost hiker." "You owned a jacket like that." "I own a lot of jackets," Zane said. Arlo folded the still and placed it back in his folder. "Here's the thing, Zane. Ivy told someone, possibly in her journal, that someone promised not to follow her. Then she vanished. 7 years later, we find her blood. Now, I don't care about your trail stories or your local legend status. I care about the truth." Zane leaned forward. "And I told you the truth. We hadn't talked in months. I didn't even know she was going out there again." "But you knew her," Arlo said. "You knew she'd run to the forest when she was overwhelmed." Zane hesitated. "That's what she did." "She disappeared when things got hard." "Like what? You?" Zane laughed coldly. "You want me to say I drove her to it? That I broke her?" "I didn't. Ivy was already broken." That hit Arlo like a punch. He stood up. "We're not done, Zane." "Don't forget," Zane said, standing too, his voice colder now. "You questioned me 7 years ago and didn't charge me with anything then either." Arlo stared at him for a moment, then walked away. Back at the precinct, Maeve watched the recording of Zane's interview. She rewound to the moment he was shown the still frame. "See that?" she said, pointing. Beckett leaned over her shoulder. "What?" "His hand." Maeve froze the frame. "He clenches it, barely. That's involuntary stress." "Guilt?" "Maybe." "Not guilt," Maeve replied, "but definitely fear." Beckett crossed her arms. "We can't charge him with clenched fists." "No," Maeve said, "but we can build pressure." The next day, Maeve reviewed Ivy's old phone logs again. Something had nagged her for days. In the weeks before her disappearance, Ivy had deleted nearly every text message except for one string, partially recovered from a cloud backup. "Zane, you think you can cut me out?" "Ivy, why? This isn't working, Zane. You'll see." "You'll miss me when the woods go quiet." Maeve's breath caught. She enlarged the message and printed it. She met Arlo that evening in his truck, parked at the overlook above Pine Ridge. The view stretched endlessly, miles of trees, golden with fall. Maeve handed him the printed text. Arlo read it once. Then again. "She was scared of him," he said finally. "She told someone else too," Maeve added. "Remember the voicemail Delilah mentioned? The one Ivy never got to send?" "She recorded it," Arlo said slowly. "She always recorded things. Audio notes, videos." Maeve nodded. What if there's more on that camcorder? I'll go back through it tonight. That night, Arlo sat in his den with headphones on, eyes fixed on the screen. Frame by frame, he watched Ivy's last recorded moments again, but just after the static, he noticed a glitch, barely a millisecond of audio that had been skipped in earlier renders. He isolated the segment and increased the gain a breath. Then a whisper, Zane. The name trembled out of her mouth, barely audible. He froze. She had seen him. The next morning, Arlo walked into Beckett's office. I want a warrant. Beckett looked up. For? Zane Talcott's cabin. I want to search his gear, his phone history, his vehicle logs from 2012. On what grounds? Because Ivy named him, Arlo said. Not officially, but clearly enough, Beckett considered it. This'll get messy. He's well liked. Trains? F his county. I don't care, Arlo said. She was afraid of him. I'm not letting him vanish behind a smile and a climbing rope. Beckett nodded slowly. I'll authorize it. Somewhere in the woods not far from Shadow Lake, a crow landed on a bare branch and cawed into the silence. Beneath the ground, the path stirred again, and not everyone was ready to face what Ivy had left behind. Maeve adjusted the angle of her laptop as rain scattered across the evidence room window. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead barely masked the storm outside. She had been combing through Ivy's recovered data all morning, backed up fragments salvaged from her old email account, unearthed through court-ordered access. Among spam, hiking gear ads, and empty drafts, one file stood out, a message timestamped 3 days before Ivy vanished in 2012. Never sent, never seen. It began simply. Delilah, Maeve leaned in. I know what you did. I know why you stopped coming with me. I saw how you looked at him. You could have told me. You could have been honest. But instead you hid behind your soft smiles and fake apologies while I bled quietly inside. Maeve froze. Ivy's pain wasn't just about Zane. It had something to do with her closest friend. She scanned the rest. I'm not safe around him anymore. And you knew it. You let me go back anyway. I hope whatever you got out of this was worth it. There was no sign-off. Just an empty cursor blinking at the bottom of the draft. Like Ivy had hesitated, then disappeared. Maeve forwarded it to Mendez and titled the file, Subject, Delilah. Detective Arlo Mendez read the email in his truck under a flickering street lamp outside the old Talcott climbing gym. The words clung to him like morning frost. Ivy's tone was unmistakably wounded, betrayed, but what struck Mendez most was the implication. Delilah had knowingly stood by while Ivy spiraled into danger. It was time to pay Delilah a visit. Delilah Grant lived on the far edge of Pine Hollow, tucked into a cedar cabin that smelled of rosemary and worn paperbacks. She opened the door hesitantly, a mug of tea in one hand, her blue eyes wide and tired. I figured this day might come, she said quietly, stepping aside. Mendez took in the home pictures of mountain peaks, books on psychology, framed group photos of hiking clubs from a decade past. Ivy was in several of them, always in the center, always smiling. He handed Delilah a printed copy of the unsent email. Her hands trembled as she read it. Where did you find this? Digital archive, he said gently. We believe Ivy wrote it shortly before she vanished. Can you tell me what she meant? Delilah didn't answer right away. She lowered herself into the armchair and stared at the faded photo of her and Ivy on the bookshelf. We were inseparable once. Every hike, every storm, every campsite. She was lightning and I was always trying to keep up. She exhaled, and then Zane came along. Mendez waited. I didn't mean to get close to him. It was a moment stupid. One-time mistake. He kissed me when Ivy was away for a week. I pushed him off. I told her when she got back, part of it. Just that he'd made me uncomfortable. I didn't mention the kiss. I thought protecting her meant hiding things. But she changed after that, grew distant, her voice cracked. I stopped going on hikes with her, not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't stand the guilt. Every time she looked at me, it was like she knew. Mendez studied her. Did Zane threaten her? Did you see signs? Delilah nodded slowly. Once, near the lake trail. She came back to the cabin with a bruised wrist. Said she'd slipped on a rock. But her eyes, they were terrified. Like a deer watching fire. Creep closer. Did you ever report him? I begged her to leave him, Delilah whispered. But she said she could handle it. That he was just broken. I didn't know how far it would go. I swear I didn't. The silence that followed was crushing. Only the kettle on the stove whistled softly. Forgotten. Mendez stood. If there's anything else anyplace. She might have gone, anything she said before the end. Delilah hesitated. There was one place. The east overlook above Shadow Lake. She called it her thinking rock. Said if she ever disappeared, I should look there. He nodded and left without another word. That night, Maeve reviewed Ivy's GPS logs from 2012, cross-referencing them with archived ranger reports. A path did exist from their cabin to the east overlook. Ivy had walked it dozens of times until her trail ended 7 years ago. Maeve zoomed in. One flagged timestamp appeared on April 19, 2012, 2 days before Ivy vanished. It was the last GPS ping from her hiking app. Right at the east overlook dot, she highlighted the data, attached the image, and sent it to Mendez with a brief message. She was there. The next morning, clouds hung low over the valley as Mendez and Maeve hiked the slick trail toward the overlook. Pines loomed overhead, whispering with every gust. No caution tape. No signs of past investigation. Ivy's thinking rock had gone untouched all these years. They found it at the cliff's edge, a flat slab of granite shaped like a seat, moss lining its base. Below, Shadow Lake shimmered in gray mist. Maeve crouched and examined the surrounding area. Someone camped here once. See the burn marks? Old, but deliberate. Mendez scanned the ground. Then he saw it half buried beneath leaves and erosion. A rusted tin box, the kind hikers sometimes used as makeshift safes. Inside were scraps, a broken compass, an old wristwatch, and a torn corner of a photograph, just Ivy's eyes and part of her smile. But what chilled Mendez was what lay beneath. In a charred piece of paper, water-warped but faintly legible, dotted read, "If I don't make it back, tell them I didn't fall." I ran. Reed Hollis lived in a rust-colored trailer perched on the edge of a dusty bluff. A crooked satellite dish leaned into the wind like it had given up years ago. His porch was cluttered with sun-bleached hiking boots, old coffee mugs, and a yellowed National Geographic cover pinned above the doorframe with a pocket knife. Detective Mendez stepped over a pile of crumpled maps and knocked once. The screen door creaked open. Reed appeared, tall but hunched, weather-beaten with a beard gone to silver. He smelled faintly of tobacco and pine. "You're here about the girl," he said before Mendez even introduced himself. "I told the other officer everything I know." "This is just a follow-up," Mendez replied, already noting how alert Reed's eyes were. "You were the last person to speak to Ivy Rousseau before she went into the woods. Mind going over it again?" Reed stepped aside. "Come in if you're not scared of mildew and coffee stronger than regret." Inside, the trailer was cramped but tidy. Maps curled on every surface, and hiking gear hung from ceiling hooks. A taxidermied fox stared blankly from above the tiny fireplace. Mendez sat on a creaky stool as Reed poured black coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. "She came in on a Friday morning," Reed began, settling across from him. "Said she was going to hike the Devil's Spine Trail. Wanted the old map, not the digital stuff. Told her it wasn't safe solo, but she insisted. Mendez sipped the coffee, burnt, bitter, just like Reed's voice. Did she say why she was going? Didn't ask? I don't pry when someone's got eyes like that, like she was running from something but pretending it was a pilgrimage. You sold her a map and supplies? Yeah. Dehydrated meals, a flare gun, a first aid kit. Same I'd give any stubborn hiker trying to tame the woods. She paid cash, no questions. Mendez paused. You said before you saw her head down the path. Did she speak to anyone else before leaving? Reed frowned. No, just me and that red squirrel that lives in the stump. Were you alone at the store that morning? Always am. Except the dog, but she don't talk much. Mendez jotted notes, then changed course. You know Ivy's ex-boyfriend Zane Talcott? Reed gave a tight nod. Instructor over at Summit Rock Gym. Cocky. Always smelled like chalk and Axe body spray. Saw him once try to correct a girl on belay technique when she hadn't asked. Ivy wasn't with him that time, but I've seen them hike before. Never looked happy. There was a pause. Reed, Mendez said slowly, you were charged with sexual misconduct 10 years ago. Care to explain? Reed didn't flinch. It was a misunderstanding. Teenager came in high. Accused me of touching her arm. Case was dropped. Still ruined. Me. My wife left. Clients stopped coming. But I didn't touch her, not like that. Mendez held his gaze, then let the silence do its work. Reed exhaled. You think I hurt Ivy? He finally asked, not angrily, but hollow. You think I'm that lonely old creep? I'm just covering all angles, Mendez replied. You said she left around noon. No hikers reported seeing her on the trail. There's no footage of her car past the main lot. And now we've found blood hers near the river bend. Reed paled. Jesus. She trusted you enough to buy a map. Maybe she asked for advice. Maybe she said something to someone else you didn't see. Reed stared into his coffee. She didn't say much, but now that you mention it, she dropped a piece of paper on the counter. I handed it back without reading it. Thought it was a list. But she looked scared when I gave it to her, like I wasn't supposed to see it. Do you still have it? God, no. Might have thrown it away if she didn't take it. Mendez stood. You mind if we take a look through your trash? Reed gestured toward the back. Be my guest. Bins are full of mice and guilt. Knock yourself out. Maeve joined them 15 minutes later. The detective had called her from the road once Reed allowed access to the bins. They combed through 3 black bags behind the trailer, sifting through ramen wrappers, spent batteries, and old grocery receipts. Then Maeve froze. Found something, she said, holding up a crumpled, dirt-smudged piece of paper. It had water damage, but ink bled through faintly. Words scrawled hastily. He said he wouldn't follow, but the shadow keeps growing. If anything happens, ask her. She knows. They all do. Maeve turned to Mendez. It's her handwriting, Ivy's. Reed backed away slowly. I swear I didn't read it. I didn't even. No one's accusing you, Mendez said, though the weight in his voice suggested otherwise. But Ivy was scared, paranoid, and this note confirmed she didn't trust the people closest to her. Maeve folded the paper. Carefully, I'll get it to the lab. See if we can recover more of the ink. Mendez turned back to Reed. One last thing. You ever hear the name Delilah? Reed scratched his beard. Maybe. Blonde girl? Used to come hiking with Ivy before she started going solo. Haven't seen her in a while. Maeve looked up. She was the last one Ivy emailed accusing her of something. We're following. Up now. The detective gave Reed a long look. If you remember anything else, even the smallest thing, you call me. Reed nodded, suddenly looking much older. As they drove away, Maeve stared at the paper again. She was leaving breadcrumbs. Mendez. She knew someone was circling her. Mendez gripped the wheel. Then we better find out who before someone sweeps them all away. Ahead, the sun dipped below the tree line and shadows stretched long across the dirt road. In the stillness, the forest whispered secrets once only Ivy had heard. Now it was up to them to listen. The tape began with the usual Ivy witty, upbeat, speaking directly into the lens. Day 2, she smiled, brushing wind-blown hair from her face. The air up here smells like old pine needles and secrets. I think I like it. Maeve sat in the darkened motel room, the camcorder whirring softly in her lap. Detective Mendez stood behind her, arms folded, his expression unreadable. The footage found in Ivy's sealed tent recovered near a cliff edge weeks earlier had just been cleared by forensics. No edits. No evidence of tampering. Just raw memory. Then the shift. Timestamp showed it was nearing dusk. Ivy's face appeared again, but her tone was different, quieter, breathless. I know I'm not imagining it, she whispered. The lens jerked, turning toward the rustling trees. A low zoom followed, catching someone? Just beyond. A thicket, a blur. A shape that retreated too quickly. Another clip. Ivy crouched behind a moss-covered rock. I saw him again, she said, eyes darting. He's not saying anything, just standing there, then gone. I yelled once, but he didn't move. It's like he wanted me to know he was there. Mendez exhaled through his nose. She's terrified. Reed said he never left town, Maeve replied, her voice tight. But this was taken near Lookout Ridge. The ranger said no one else was signed into that trail register after Ivy. She could have missed someone, Mendez countered, or someone followed without checking in. Maeve clicked the remote again. Ivy was crying now, her whispering nearly inaudible beneath the wind. I don't trust anyone anymore, not even Delilah. Something's not right. I thought coming here would clear my head, but a branch cracked off screen. Ivy flinched. The screen went dark. Silence filled the room. Even Mendez didn't speak for a long moment. She knew, Maeve said softly. She knew someone was after her. Question is, Mendez murmured, was it someone she knew too? The next morning, Maeve visited the trailhead alone. Mendez had driven back to the county station to cross-check a detail about Reed's alibi. Maeve, restless and spiraling with unanswered questions, retraced Ivy's steps. The fog was thick, curling between the trees like smoke. Her boots crunched on gravel and leaves. Birds chirped faintly somewhere far off, muffled by the blanket of damp air. Maeve paused at a small wooden bridge. It was there Ivy had filmed one of her last diary-style recordings. Maeve recognized the overgrown shrub beside the railing. She pulled out her phone and matched the timestamp from Ivy's footage to her GPS. Same spot. She turned slowly in place, raising her phone to eye level. Nothing moved. No figures behind trees. No shadows darting across the path. But something still felt off. Back at the ranger station, she requested the full trail surveillance, just in case. Rangers only monitored parts of the park, but some motion-triggered cameras had been installed after a string of bear sightings last spring. To Maeve's surprise, one camera near the Raven Hollow Bend had been triggered twice that week. Once by Ivy, the day she vanished, and once again the next morning by someone walking in the opposite direction, wearing a hoodie and carrying what looked like a walking stick. The timestamp didn't match Reed's alibi. When she called Mendez, his voice tightened. Reed told me he hadn't been up that trail in weeks. Well, Maeve said, forwarding the file, this shows someone matching his height and gait walking back toward the south exit the next day. Still not definitive, Mendez replied. But it's something. Maeve wasn't satisfied. That night, she returned to the footage, frame by frame. Ivy had zoomed into someone moving in the woods. Using software, Maeve enhanced the stills. The figure was too blurry for facial recognition, but the silhouette had broad shoulders and what looked like a wide-brimmed hat. Not a hoodie. Not Reed. Not Zane. A third person. She froze the frame and stared. Her breath caught in her throat. The outline of the hat matched a photo she'd once seen in Ivy's sketchbook, the one she'd used to draw people she found unsettling or memorable. In one of the pages, Ivy had scribbled a man sitting across from her at a cafe in town. Hat, broad chin, scar near his temple. She'd written next to it, "Can't shake the feeling he's watching me." Maeve flipped through her notes. That drawing had been dated 2 weeks before Ivy's trip. She found the page again. There it was, the same figure, wide-brimmed hat, slouched posture. She called Mendez again. "This isn't just about Reed or Zane," she said. "There was someone else Ivy saw, maybe even before the hike. Someone she couldn't name. I'll pull security footage from that cafe. What's the name again?" "Riverstone Brew, corner of 5th and Alder." As Mendez made calls, Maeve reached out to Delilah again. After their last tense conversation, Delilah had gone quiet, but Maeve wasn't giving up. "I think Ivy was being followed before she even came to the trail," Maeve said when Delilah finally picked up. She was scared. "You said she changed after that night at the lake with Zane?" Delilah hesitated. "Yes, but not just because of Zane. There was a man. We saw him parked near Ivy's apartment once. He never got out of the car, but he watched her walk inside. Ivy said it was probably nothing. Did you tell the police?" "I didn't think it mattered back then." "It does now," Maeve said. That night, Maeve reviewed the trail footage again. The camcorder's battery had died shortly after the last clip. But the final minute haunted her, Ivy's hand trembling, her voice a breathless whisper saying, "I don't think I'll make it back." And then, right before the screen cut to black, a single word barely audible. "Why?" Maeve whispered. The word to herself, over and over. Why had Ivy come alone? Why had no one believed she was in danger? Why had the truth remained hidden for so long? The next morning, Mendez called. "I pulled the cafe footage from 2 weeks before Ivy's trip," he said. "Guess what?" Maeve held her breath. "He was there." Ivy's sketch was spot on. Broad shoulders, scar near his eye. Sat across from her, just like she drew. We ran facial recognition. "His name's Garrett Lorne, former park ranger." Maeve's stomach dropped. "A ranger?" "Suspended 2 years ago after multiple complaints of stalking female hikers," Mendez said grimly. "And guess what else?" "What?" "He used to work this exact trail system." Maeve's eyes locked on the frozen image of Ivy in the camcorder's final clip, her lips parted in a fearful breath. Eyes wide. Whatever she saw out there hadn't just followed her into the woods. It had already been inside her life. Maeve stared. Across the table at Delilah, the woman who once hiked beside Ivy, laughing through trail winds and tangled roots. Now she sat shrunken, pale, her hands trembling as if the truth were ice forming in her veins. The journal lay between them, Ivy's words scrawled in loops that still smelled faintly of pine sap and thyme. It was Maeve's persistence, her refusal to accept silence, that finally cracked Delilah's carefully buried facade. Delilah's voice came out in pieces, like broken glass. "She was pregnant, Maeve. Ivy was pregnant when she vanished." For a moment, the words didn't settle. They drifted in the air, surreal. But Maeve's heart dropped. She had felt something like this coming, though not this exact blow. Not a child. Not that Ivy was carrying a life when she disappeared into the woods. And she thought it was Reed's, Delilah whispered. Maeve blinked. "Reed Hollis?" Delilah nodded slowly. She told me after one of our hikes. I thought she was mistaken, confused. He was too old for her. But she wasn't stupid. She knew what happened. She didn't want to name him outright in her journal. But it's all there. She wrote about the night in vague terms, about power, shame, and fear. That was the last entry she ever let me read. Maeve's stomach twisted. She reached for the journal. Why didn't you tell anyone? Delilah shook her head, tears brimming. I was scared. I was manipulated. Zane. He convinced me not to say anything. Zane? Maeve's voice hardened. What does he have to do with this? Delilah looked away, guilt scorching her face. I was in love with him. Stupid. I know. Ivy had broken things off with him by then, but I wanted him to see me. He told me Ivy was dramatic, unstable, that she exaggerated, that I should let things go, not stir trouble. He said if I really cared about her, I'd protect her from herself. Maeve leaned back, disgust flaring. So you helped cover it up. Delilah nodded, shame pouring from her in waves. She gave me the journal for safekeeping a few days before she disappeared. Told me to hold on to it just in case something happened. But after she vanished, I panicked. Zane told me to burn it. I couldn't, so I hid it instead. Maeve opened the leather-bound journal to a dog-eared page. There were no names, but the emotion was raw, palpable. Ivy had written about a night she didn't fully remember, about waking up sore, about Reed's voice in her ear afterward, telling her it was just a mistake. She had used phrases like power imbalance and coerced intimacy. Maeve didn't need more detail. She could hear Ivy's pain in every word. I didn't know about the baby until later, Delilah said, voice cracking. She never used the word pregnant, just talked about being late, about feeling off. I begged her to see a doctor, but she was afraid someone in town would find out. She didn't trust anyone after what happened. Maeve closed the journal gently. So Ivy thought Reed had assaulted her, and Zane made sure you stayed quiet. Delilah nodded. Zane always knew how to twist the truth. He kept saying if I went to the police, it would ruin everything, Ivy's name, my life. I believed him. Maeve stared at her. And now? I can't keep pretending, Delilah said. Every time I saw your face around town, I knew the past was coming back, and I deserve it. The silence that followed was thick. Outside, wind rustled. Through the aspens, Maeve felt the truth settling inside her chest like heavy stones. Ivy had died with secrets lodged in every breath, and the people closest to her had tightened the lid. Maeve stood, clutching the journal. We're going to the police. Delilah hesitated. What if they don't believe me? Maeve's gaze sharpened. They will. Or I'll make sure they have no choice. That evening, Maeve sat in her car outside the sheriff's office, watching the windows glow with the dull orange of dusk. She didn't go in right away. She scrolled through the camcorder footage again, frame by frame. Ivy's voice still trembled. In her ears, he's following me. Then a blur, a movement between trees. Not clear enough to identify a face, but a figure was there. Maeve clicked to the next clip. Ivy crouched behind a rock, her face flushed, breath shallow. Delilah won't answer her phone. I think she's with Zane. I can't trust either of them now. Maeve froze. The clip was time-stamped just one day before Ivy's disappearance. Appelle this and na. Knock on the window jolted her. Deputy Mallory. Maeve rolled down the glass. You okay? Mallory asked. Maeve nodded, lifting the journal. I need to report something big. Inside the station, she laid out everything, Delilah's confession, the journal, the footage. Mallory listened carefully, his usual detached expression. Softening. This is serious, he said. We'll need to question Reed again, and Zane. Maeve hesitated. You think Reed could have? We'll find out, Mallory interrupted. We have a search team going back out to the ridge tomorrow. If there's anything buried out there, we'll find it. Maeve left the station with a faint tremor in her hands. The truth was unspooling now, threads she couldn't stop even if she wanted to. That night, Delilah texted her a photo. It was an old trail map, the edges singed and folded. On the back, in Ivy's handwriting, if anything happens to me, follow the markers past the old fire tree. Maeve stared at the message for a long time, her pulse quickening. The map Ivy bought from Reed, the one he claimed he sold without noting anything unusual. But Ivy had left a trail hidden, marked, and Maeve would follow. The morning after Delilah's tearful confession, the air in the sheriff's office felt heavier, like the entire mountain had leaned in to listen. Maeve sat silently across from Sheriff Beck, the weight of Ivy's journal now burning in her satchel like a second conscience. Delilah's words still rang in her ears. Ivy was pregnant, and she believed Reed was the father. Sheriff Beck didn't speak for a long time after Maeve handed him the journal. He scanned Ivy's entries, each page tightening the lines in his weathered face. When he finally set it down, his voice was tight. We're getting a warrant. We search Reed Hollis property now. By noon, a convoy of 2 cruisers and 1 unmarked SUV crept up the winding gravel road to Reed's remote cabin. Tucked behind a dense wall of pines, the place looked more like a survivalist's bunker than a home. An old truck sat rusting beneath a tarp. A wind chime made from deer bones rattled hollowly in the breeze. He's not here, Deputy Carson confirmed after knocking 3 times and circling the perimeter. Sheriff Beck nodded. Maeve, you wait outside. But Maeve had come too far, seen too much, to remain on the porch. She followed at a cautious distance as the officers entered. Inside, the air was stale, as if time had stopped. Shelves were lined with survival manuals, unlabeled VHS tapes, and vintage hunting knives. A dusty taxidermy hawk loomed above the fireplace. Maeve's eyes were drawn to a hand-drawn map tacked beside the bookshelf. It detailed several local trails, but someone had scribbled in a red X far off the official paths. This doesn't match any known trail, she whispered. Check everything, Beck ordered. Look for anything connected to Ivy or any of the other missing persons cases. It wasn't until Maeve brushed her hand along a warped bookshelf that something shifted. The wood gave under her fingers with a creak that felt out of place. Here, she said. This wall's wrong. Beck moved quickly, prying at the panel until it popped loose. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, no more than 2 feet deep. Inside, lit only by the flashlight on Carson's belt, were items that stopped Maeve cold. A pair of worn hiking boots, muddy but unmistakably Ivy's, a torn blue nylon sleeve identical to the jacket Ivy wore in her last known camcorder footage. And then, nestled inside a cracked wooden box, was the delicate necklace shaped like a silver leaf. Maeve's hands trembled. She'd seen it around Ivy's neck dozens of times in old videos. Sheriff Beck turned slowly. His voice was ice. He's not just a person of interest now. He's a fugitive. They radioed in the findings. Within the hour, an official manhunt was launched. Reed Hollis had vanished. The following morning, the small town of Elkridge erupted into unease. Flyers with Reed's photo appeared on every power pole and storefront. Do not approach, they read. Call immediately. The search party scoured nearby woods with dogs and heat detection drones. Old friends of Reed were questioned, and trail cams along nearby access roads were reviewed. Most led nowhere, but what surfaced instead, as the town held its breath, was the unraveling of another horror. A retired park ranger named Elena Morley came forward, holding a photo from 1999. This girl went missing 15 miles from here. Her name was Holly Keene, backpacker, 22. Never found a trace of her until now, maybe. Maeve leaned in. The resemblance was undeniable. The same solo hiker gear, the same route through the BACKCOUNTRY. Sheriff Beck had the photo analyzed and cross-referenced Reed's employment history. He was working at a mountain lodge near that region the summer Holly disappeared. Maeve stared at the news clippings pinned to the wall at the station. Holly, then Ivy. Both young, both hikers. Both last seen before vanishing into the fog. The pattern wasn't a coincidence. It was a timeline. 3 nights into the manhunt, a breakthrough came in the form of a single phone call. "I saw someone near Boulder Pass," a hiker reported breathlessly. "Long gray beard, looked like Hollis. He ducked into the trees when he saw me." Search teams were deployed instantly, combing the ridge trail. Maeve, though not officially sanctioned, joined them. Her instincts screamed that Reed wasn't just hiding, he was hunting, or returning to something. By midnight, the dogs caught a scent near the cliffside trailhead. A torn piece of denim fluttered from a bush. Beneath it, recent boot prints led into a thicket of trees. They followed the trail for nearly half a mile until it suddenly stopped at a rocky incline. Deputy Carson knelt, brushing away pine needles. "There's blood," he whispered. "Fresh." Maeve's stomach turned. Sheriff Beck ordered a sweep of the nearby ravine, suspecting Reed might be injured or had harmed someone else. But then, in a stroke of chilling clarity, Maeve remembered the red X on the cabin's map. Pulling a printout from her pack, she overlaid it with a satellite map on her phone. The marked spot was near a secluded bend of the Elkridge River, less than 2 miles from their current location. "We need to check here," she insisted. "Right now." The journey to the marked spot was brutal, narrow, overgrown, and riddled with switchbacks. By the time they arrived, dawn was threatening to break. At the edge of the riverbank, hidden behind a curtain of brush, they found a clearing. A handmade fire pit, charred remains of animal bones, and a collapsed lean-to made from branches and tarp. But what made Maeve's breath catch wasn't the structure, it was what lay beside it. Half buried in the soil, under a camouflage tarp, was a canvas duffel. Inside, more of Ivy's belongings. Her handheld compass, her guidebook, warped from moisture, and a blood-stained scarf. Beck's voice was barely audible. "He's been living out here, watching, waiting." Maeve stepped back, heart hammering, and turned toward the dense woods. Somewhere in the trees, she felt it. Eyes watching. As the team radioed for backup, Maeve wandered further into the clearing, flashlight trembling. At the base of an old cedar, something glinted in the dirt. She crouched. It was a metal latch attached to a narrow trapdoor, half concealed by moss. Her voice cracked. "Sheriff." They opened it together, a root cellar. Crude steps descended into darkness. The smell hit first damp, rotting earth. And something far more human. Flashlights swept the interior. Old canned goods. A cot, rope, a tattered journal scrawled in barely legible handwriting. And then, bones, a partial skeleton, buried shallow in the dirt floor. Maeve choked back bile. Reed had done this before. They sealed the site and called in forensic teams. Maeve stood at the edge of the clearing, frozen by the river's whisper. The sky was pale now, the fog lifting. But nothing felt clearer. Reed Hollis wasn't just a man with a dark past. He was a predator, and the woods had been his hunting ground for decades. As she turned back toward the trail, a crack of branches made everyone freeze. A figure bolted from the trees. Reed, disheveled, wild-eyed, bleeding from the arm. Maeve shouted, "There!" He ran toward the ridge, vanishing into the mist again. The hunt wasn't over. Not yet. The phone call came just after dawn, cutting through the static of the sheriff's radio like a razor. Maeve, already seated at the edge of the department's caseboard, stiffened. The voice on the other end was male trembling, anonymous. "Check the ravine near Hollow Lake," he whispered. "You'll find what you're looking for where the ice cracked." Within the hour, search crews moved through brittle underbrush toward the frozen basin, the morning fog hovering like a held breath. Maeve and Deputy Ferris led the team, flashlights sweeping across rocks glazed with frost. The ravine had been overlooked during early searches, its steep slope and icy terrain deemed too treacherous. But now it welcomed them like an open wound. Halfway down, the search dogs stopped. They whined, circled, and pawed at the crusted ground near the crook of a boulder. A shallow indentation, like a collapsed cave, had opened beneath the softened ice. Maeve crouched, heart thrumming in her throat, as the forensic team carefully brushed away the remaining sediment. Then came the unmistakable glint of bone. Ivy's skeleton lay curled inward, like she had folded into herself against the cold. Her clothes, though torn and faded, were recognizable. Her hiking jacket still clung to part of her frame, though one sleeve was missing. Around her neck, a frayed ribbon that once held a charm lay stiff with age. A small backpack rested inches away, its zipper rusted shut. When they pried it open, the smell of rot gave way to paper. Inside was Ivy's journal, water damaged, its pages fused together in places, the ink running like tears. But a few entries near the middle had been spared. Maeve held her breath as she flipped through the legible lines. "He followed me again. I know it's him. He hums when he walks. Delilah knows. I saw her watching us, but she turned away. He said I reminded him of her. I don't know who she is, but I think she's gone too." Maeve's fingers trembled. Each sentence struck like a nail in the coffin, not only of Ivy's life, but of the illusions everyone had clung to. Delilah's guilt now took on weight. Reed's denial frayed into cowardice. And whoever she was, the one Ivy reminded him of, that mystery now clawed its way into the open. Maeve stood by the ravine's edge as the body was airlifted out. Reporters hovered at a distance, their questions muffled by the helicopter blades. But she didn't move. Her eyes followed the gurney until it disappeared into the trees. Ivy's parents, notified earlier, hadn't arrived yet. Maeve dreaded what she would have to say to them. Back at the station, the evidence table filled quickly. Ivy's necklace found in Reed's cabin was matched to photos from her video logs. Her boots and torn sleeve as well. And now, with the discovery of her remains, the case had shifted from missing person to homicide, but Reed was still missing. The manhunt expanded across county lines. Drones combed the treetops, dogs sniffed through marshy woods, and roadblocks were set at every highway exit. Locals whispered of sightings, someone matching Reed's description buying canned food at a gas station, someone slipping into a tool shed after dark. But each lead fizzled. Maeve pored over Ivy's journal entries again that night, flashlight in hand. Her eyes caught a smudged name that appeared in one of the earlier pages. Zane. She hadn't seen it before, not clearly. But now, with the Vive rest of the puzzle emerging, Zane's role no longer seemed peripheral. He had manipulated Delilah, according to her own confession. Could he have done more? She called Delilah in again. This time, Delilah arrived with her lawyer, a thin man with steel-rimmed glasses and a voice like gravel. Maeve leaned in as she questioned her gently. "Did Zane ever mention anything about Ivy disappearing?" Delilah shook her head. "He never said it, but I think he knew. He got rid of her journal, said it was for the best." "Did he ever talk about someone else? Someone from the past?" Delilah's eyes welled. "Only once. He said Ivy reminded Reed of someone. A girl from college. A girl that went missing." Maeve's breath hitched. Did he say a name? No, just that she broke Reed's heart in the worst way, and that Ivy was his second chance. Maeve scribbled a note. This changed things. If there had been a girl before Ivy someone Reed couldn't let go of, then Ivy might not have been his first victim. That night, as snow began to fall again, Maeve returned to the ravine. She stood at the edge, staring down at the place where Ivy had lain hidden for years. Snowflakes clung to her eyelashes. The wind whispered through the trees like a voice just out of reach. She turned to leave, but something caught her eye. Near the bottom of the path, tucked behind a cluster of rocks, a thin line of disturbed earth peeked through the snow. Maeve crouched. Footprints, recent ones, still damp, the ice not yet reformed around them. Her heart slammed in her chest. Someone had been here, not hours ago. Watching that, she raised her radio. This is Deputy Maeve. I need backup at Hollow Lake. Suspect may be nearby. Repeat. Suspect may be nearby. But the line crackled. The cold suddenly felt sharper. She stood alone in the white hush, her breath fogging the air. The only movement the shifting snow around her boots. In the distance, a figure stepped briefly between the trees, just a blur, and vanished again. Maeve gritted her teeth and began to follow. The forest, once quiet, now seemed to breathe. Snow drifted in lazy circles outside the remote mountain outpost where Reed had been found. He was huddled near a rusted stove, half conscious, his leg wrapped in a bloodied towel. When Maeve arrived, with the local sheriff, his eyes flickered open, but not with surprise. Almost as if he'd been waiting. Did you really think you could run forever? Maeve asked, her voice brittle. Reed didn't answer. His lips were cracked, his beard ragged. The sheriff handcuffed him gently, like Reed was already broken. Maeve rode back in silence, gripping her satchel tightly, the one with Ivy's journal. Inside, her fingers kept brushing over its torn leather cover like a wound that hadn't closed. At the station, Reed sat in the interview room, drinking from a paper cup with shaking hands. Maeve watched from behind the one-way glass as Detective Halvorsen tried the standard approach, calm voice. Open posture, no accusations. Reed kept repeating one phrase over and over. She wanted to disappear. When Maeve entered the room, the air shifted. Reed's eyes lifted, dull but searching. You lied, she said simply. From the beginning. Reed looked away, but she pressed on, pulling Ivy's journal from her bag. She laid it open on the table, pages warped and discolored, but still legible. She pointed to the final line. He said I reminded him of her. Who's her? Maeve asked, her voice low. Your sister? Your mother? Ivy wasn't the first girl you tried to control, was she? Reed didn't speak, but his lips trembled. Then he whispered, You don't understand. Ivy was confused. She said she loved me one day, hated me the next. She didn't know what she wanted. No, Reed, Maeve said, her tone cutting. That's what you told her. That's what men like you say when a woman stops needing you. Reed's breath hitched. He reached for the journal, but Maeve pulled it back. You don't get to hold her words. She begged me not to tell anyone she was pregnant, he said suddenly. She was terrified. She said it would ruin everything. Maeve narrowed her eyes. Did you tell Delilah? Reed hesitated, then nodded. Delilah was already suspicious. I didn't have to say much. Maeve's heart thudded. And Zane? Long pause. Then Zane wanted her gone. Said she was a problem. A threat to his projects. He said people who dig too deep fall through the cracks. Did you kill her? She asked. I didn't mean to, Reed whispered. She tried to run, said she was going to the media, that she'd expose everything. I tried to stop her. There was ice. She slipped. I didn't push her, I swear. Maeve felt her stomach turn. You watched her die and left her there. She wasn't moving. There was blood. he murmured. I panicked. Zane told me to stay quiet, said no one would believe me anyway. Maeve stood. You're right about one thing, no one will. When? She left the room. Detective Halvorsen followed her into the hallway. Enough for a confession? Maeve shook her head. It's a tangle of guilt, denial, and half-truths. He's not innocent, but I'm not sure he's the only monster. Later that night, Maeve sat in her motel room reading the ruined journal again. The entries became more disjointed near the end, scratched words, blurred ink. Ivy had written about feeling watched, about someone moving things in her tent when she wasn't there, about hearing voices that weren't hers, and then abrupt silence, a missing week. The pages torn out, Maeve picked up her phone and called the lab. Run. Those last pages again. Check for multiple handwriting samples, especially on the margins. Looking for what? The tech asked. Maeve stared out the window, where the wind was howling over the lake. A ghost Ivy couldn't name, she said. The next morning, the sheriff got a call. A ranger reported a metal box buried beneath a cairn near the ravine where Aviver. Ivy's remains were found. Inside were microcassettes. Maeve recognized Ivy's voice on one, nervous, whispering, "If anything happens to me, look at Reed, but look past him too. Look at the men in the suits, the ones who smile too much." Maeve felt the hairs on her arms rise. The audio ended abruptly with a loud splash. By nightfall, Reed was officially charged with obstruction, concealment of evidence, and suspected manslaughter. But Maeve's gut twisted. It was too neat, too convenient. Back in her rental car, she unfolded a photograph Ivy had taken, one of her last social media posts. A panoramic view of the frozen lake with a small cabin in the distance. But zoomed in, Maeve noticed something that made her blood run cold. A figure in the tree line, watching. Not Reed. Someone taller, in a coat with a corporate logo she hadn't seen before. She started the engine. She was done with ghosts. It was time to chase the one still breathing. The snowfall had lightened by the time Maeve stepped out of the station. The sky was a heavy, pewter gray, but the sharp wind had calmed, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Behind her, the walls of the interrogation room still echoed with Reed's fragmented confession, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt, denial, and something else no one could name. Not remorse, not entirely. Just the unraveling of a carefully constructed lie. Reed had broken when Maeve read Ivy's final journal entry aloud. He said, "I reminded him of her." A single sentence, scrawled in jagged handwriting, smeared with water damage, but intact enough to damn him. Her voice had trembled, not out of fear, but fury. And he had sunk, his face collapsing like wet sand, muttering about how he never meant for it to go that far. But it had gone that far. And further. Within 48 hours, the forensic team connected the dots. Ivy's remains, found buried under a frozen ravine, contained defensive wounds and signs of a blunt force injury to the back of the skull. The camcorder fragments recovered from a Ziploc bag buried nearby had been digitally restored, mostly corrupted, save for one frame. Ivy, standing alone among the trees, wearing Reed's jacket, her lips slightly parted, her eyes unfocused. The timestamp matched the night she disappeared. A partial fingerprint on the edge of the journal, believed to have been wiped clean, was matched to Zane. The web finally gave. Zane was arrested during a routine traffic stop, caught with 2 fake IDs and a duffel bag full of cash. He denied involvement in Ivy's death, but cracked when confronted with Delilah's written testimony, the DNA reports, and Ivy's journal. His manipulation of both Ivy and Delilah, his pressure to keep Ivy in check, painted a picture of long-term coercion and psychological abuse. But it was Reed's timeline, his disappearing act to the mountains, the burns on his hands, the Half-written letter in his cabin fireplace that sealed the case. The district attorney moved swiftly. Charges against Reed included second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and concealment of remains. Zane faced charges for accessory after the fact, coercion, and witness intimidation. The courtroom was small and cold. Ivy's parents, Ellen and Martin, sat like two sculptures in the front row during the arraignment. Ellen clutched a rosary so tightly it left impressions in her palm. Maeve sat 2 rows behind them, the journal clutched in her coat like a lifeline. The truth had arrived. Not with clarity, but like a snowstorm, blinding, layered, and silent. 3 weeks later, Maeve visited the old Willow Ridge estate. It had fallen into disrepair since the family left. Windows boarded, vines reclaiming the porch, paint chipped by years of wind and time. She wasn't there to relive anything. She was there to say goodbye. In her hands was Ivy's journal, sealed in a clear evidence bag, now released. On the first page was a doodle Ivy had once drawn during homeroom, an open eye in the center of a cracked heart. The last page, nearly destroyed, had been carefully rehydrated and flattened. Maeve sat on the porch steps and opened it again, one last time. Ivy's handwriting varied from playful to panicked. Early entries spoke of dreams, poetry, and whispered love. Later ones unraveled into fear, confusion, obsession. He tells me I see too much, but he doesn't know what I've seen. I found something in the cellar, a letter, not to me, to her. I think she's still here. Somehow, Maeve closed the journal. The weight of what could have been and what had been lost settled into her bones. Behind her, the wind rustled, the dead leaves whispering through cracks in the wood. She looked back at the lake in the distance, the ice now thinning as winter slowly gave way to a gray spring. The drive to Ivy's parents' home was quiet. Maeve brought no words rehearsed, no consolations. What comfort could be offered now, after so many years of silence? She parked beneath the old sycamore and walked slowly toward the door. Ellen opened it, aged since Maeve last saw her. Her once dark hair was fully white, her face marked with lines of sleepless nights and searching years. Martin stood behind her, cane in hand, eyes hollow but alert. "I have something for you," Maeve said, holding out the bag journal. Ellen took it with trembling hands. Her fingers hovered over Ivy's name on the cover. "She wrote about you," Maeve said softly. "Even in the end." She remembered home. Ellen sat in the nearest chair and opened the journal. The silence that filled the room was heavy, but not unbearable. It was the kind of silence that held space for grief, for understanding, for truth. She was trying to find her way out. Ellen said after a long while, her voice thin but steady. And no one heard her. Maeve lowered her head. She wasn't silent. They just didn't want to listen. Back at the precinct, Maeve watched the final camcorder footage one last time. The restored frame, the only one recovered intact, was only 4 seconds long. Ivy stood between 2 pine trees, her breath visible in the cold. The camera was slightly tilted, as if held at waist level. Ivy's eyes were focused on something off-screen. Then, slowly, she turned to look directly at the camera. Her lips didn't move. Her gaze lingered. And then she walked away into the trees, into the night, into the silence that had cloaked her name for years. No screaming, no begging. Just that final look, that final step. Maeve froze the image. Ivy's face pale against the dark, her eyes wide and strangely calm. Behind her, the wind howled against the glass. A report slid off the desk. Maeve didn't move, because in that frozen frame, something lingered, an unspoken truth, a final echo of a girl who had known too much, felt too deeply, and was consumed by the very people she once trusted. The case closed with Reed's plea deal. 25 years, no parole. Zane received 12. Delilah cooperated and walked free, though the community's judgment followed her like a shadow. She moved out of state, changed her name. Maeve, though, remained. She stayed not because of duty, but because she couldn't look away. Ivy's face had burned itself into her memory long before the camcorder footage emerged. Maeve had seen it. In the missing posters, the yearbook photos, the quiet corners of a town that had refused to ask hard questions. The camcorder frame would later appear in a quiet exhibit at the local library. No headlines, no fanfare. Just a still shot labeled "The Last Known Image of Ivy Raines." March 3, 2011. Recovered 2025. Below it, a quote from her journal. "Sometimes silence is the loudest scream." And Maeve understood that now. Ivy had screamed in silence, in her journal, in her gaze, in the camera she turned on that final night. She had left clues, fragments, trails, but people only heard what they wanted to, until the cold no longer let them lie. And now, the truth stood quiet and unyielding, just like Ivy had just like the trees that had watched it all and just like the cold it doesn't lie.